The Trapper is the face of the Dead by Daylight franchise, dear viewer, and despite this fact, he's often considered to be one of the weakest killers in the entire game. For years now, he's consistently found himself at the bottom of tier lists and is usually the standard that other bad killers are compared to. For their part, Behaviour have attempted to address some of his weaknesses with a number of small buffs to his power over the years. These, however, have done little to address many of the core issues that still affect the killer's performance to this day. Today, I want to explore a rework concept that seeks to improve the efficiency of this killer's setup, increase the threat from the payoff, and rework a number of add-ons in hopes of creating a killer that's far more threatening to face. Let's start by exploring this killer's setup. The main problem this killer faces with his setup is that it takes far too long. First, the Trapper doesn't start with most of his power. Instead, bear traps spawn all over the map, meaning that a killer, who has minimal traversal as part of his kit, has to travel across the entire map if he wants to make full use of his power. The time spent doing this allows survivors to work on generators unimpeded. This means that in any match, a Trapper has to either play without using all of his traps, or concede considerable generator progress in order to try and make use of his power. Either way, you're starting any match at a disadvantage compared to even other setup killers. And none of this, dear viewer, even accounts for the whole placing your traps thing either. In between gathering your traps, you need to be placing them, given your limited inventory space. Placing traps also takes time that survivors also use to play the objective uninterrupted. In total, any time you use this killer's power, you're unlikely to be pressuring any survivors, which allows them to complete their objective far quicker. So, what could be done to address this? Well, this rework concept starts with a change that many have suggested over the years. The Trapper should be able to reload his traps by searching a locker for 3 seconds, much like the Huntress or the Trickster. This would fully reload a Trapper up to his maximum carry capacity. After there are a total of 8 traps present on the map, and or in your inventory, you would no longer be able to reload traps at a locker. This would allow a Trapper to quickly and consistently acquire more traps without too much traversal. The aim is to allow the Trapper to gain and set up traps far more quickly, reducing the time required to set up his power. Further, this concept also makes some smaller adjustments to the power based on the ability to reload traps at a locker. While carrying 0 traps, the Trapper would see the aura of bear traps inside lockers within a 36 meter radius, similar to how the Huntress sees the auras of hatchets. This simple addition would improve the quality of life for a Trapper and help less experienced players locate lockers and reload their power. Next, the Trapper would no longer gain haste after placing a trap. This feature currently helps a Trapper to move around the map slightly quicker whilst he's setting up his power. However, with the addition of reloading at lockers, this would no longer be necessary. This aspect can also be used in chase in some circumstances, but that will be explored later in the video. In summary, a Trapper would now have a much easier time gathering and placing his traps, reducing the time required to set up his power. This would reduce the time given to survivors at the start of a match, and allow for the Trapper to start pressuring survivors sooner. Nice, I hear you say, but all of that wouldn't do too much to help you when a survivor spots your carefully placed bear trap. Indeed, dear viewer, and that leads me to the next, much beefier part of this video, the payoff. Currently, any bear trap that you place acts as a glass cannon. If it catches a survivor, that can be a free hook state. But if a survivor spots your bear trap, they can disarm it with no repercussions. They can completely deny you your power, and at no cost to themselves. This effect is even worse on maps that have little to no grass capable of concealing your bear traps. Essentially, in these cases, you're at the mercy of the survivors who can force you to play as nothing more than an M1 killer. All that time spent setting up your power and, well, it can end up being for naught. So what does this concept do to address that? Well, dear viewer, there are a considerable number of changes in this rework that seek to make bear traps far more threatening once they're placed. Let's start with a simple one that many people have suggested over the years. Maps can no longer track bear traps. Whilst not many survivors use maps, in instances where they are used, they can completely deny you your power. No other killer in the game has their power completely and directly countered by any universal item, and this is, frankly, an outdated feature. Next, the Trapper can no longer step in his own bear traps. It's certainly a cool feature from a lore standpoint, but it also feels out of place in this game. the hag can't activate her own phantasms, the nightmare can't be caught in his own snares, and the clown can't intoxicate himself. And yet the trapper still has to be mindful of stepping in his own bear traps. By removing this aspect of his power, the trapper could use bear traps to increase the length of a survivor's loop without increasing the length of his own. This means that even in instances where a survivor skirts around a bear trap, it can still have some use in closing loops. Now we'll move on to some changes that would affect survivors that are caught in bear traps. Survivors that are freed from a bear trap by any means would suffer the following effects, in addition to being injured. First, they would suffer from the deep wound status effect. This would grant the trapper some slowdown even if a bear trap catches a survivor across the map. Further, survivors that escape a bear trap would also have their position revealed by killer instinct for 3 seconds. This would improve a trapper's ability to track survivors after they've escaped a bear trap. In total, these effects would allow for the bear traps to be more punishing in instances where survivors are caught far away from the killer. Additionally, the improved tracking would increase the killer's capacity to target and chase already injured survivors. Well, Cameron, I hear you say, that's nice and all, but it wouldn't do anything to make disarming traps more risky. Correct again, dear viewer, and this is where the following changes come in. First, the disarming time would be increased to 5 seconds. This is only a slight increase and by itself it wouldn't do much. However, this will make more sense a bit later. Next, survivors who disarm bear traps would also be revealed by killer instinct for 3 seconds. This would make it easier to track survivors who meddle with bear traps and stop them before they can undo several placed bear traps. The final effect would be according to a survivor's current state. Essentially, anytime a survivor disarms a bear trap, they would pay a price in blood. This table should help visualize this effect more easily. Healthy survivors would become injured, the current effect of the Bloody Coil add-on. Injured survivors would suffer from the deep wound status effect. And survivors that are injured and suffering from deep wounds would have their deep wounds timer reduced by 15 seconds. In tandem with the 5-second disarm time, this would forcibly put a survivor into the dying state. In essence, dear viewer, a healthy survivor would be capable of disarming 2 bear traps before needing to mend. In total, this would make survivors who disarm bear traps more vulnerable and allow a trapper to more consistently target and chase injured survivors if they choose to disarm his bear traps. The goal is to still allow survivors to counter the threat posed by bear traps, but at a cost. Rather than simply locating and disarming bear traps, survivors would need to weigh up the choice of disarming. Is it worth it gaining access to a loop at the cost of a health state? The same choice would be open to trapper players who may wish to conceal their traps for potential free hook states, or instead place visible traps that will more consistently take health states. In total, the goal is to make setting traps more useful, as they will always have at least some value. In the best case, they'll catch a survivor and grant you a free hook state. However, if they're disarmed, a survivor will become vulnerable, potentially leading to a shorter chase. And finally, if a trap is active but a survivor runs around it, the trapper can safely step over the trap in order to run a shorter loop than the survivor. This means that in most cases, a bear trap would manage to have at least some value once it's been placed. Now, with all of this talk about buffs, we've failed to discuss the one aspect that this killer's power excels at: camping the basement. For the uninitiated, it's pretty simple. The trapper will down a survivor near the basement, and then proceed to hook that survivor in the basement. And, especially if the basement is located in the killer shack, the trapper can then lock down the surrounding area to make saving that survivor very difficult. This is usually helped by the use of the Trapper Sack add-on, which allows the trapper to start with all of his bear traps at the start of a trial. For experienced and coordinated survivors, this can be readily dealt with using callouts and certain perks. However, for the average player, this usually turns into a nightmare that quickly spirals out of control. Under this concept, the ability for traps to injure survivors who disarm them would make this strategy even more punishing to survivors than it currently is. So, how could we deal with this? Well, simply, a new silent disarming effect would take place once a survivor had been hooked. Any bear trap within 16 meters of a hooked survivor would become silently disarmed. This effect would continue for 16 seconds after the survivor has been unhooked. after which the traps would silently rearm. Further, under this concept, the entirety of the basement would be considered 0 meters from the hook, with the distance counting from the top of the basement stairs. This would remove a trapper's ability to defend hooks using bear traps, and prevent a trapper from locking down certain locations. Instead, survivors would always be able to safely move near a hooked survivor and know that they won't be trapped. However, if a survivor decides to heal under the hook, they could be at risk of becoming trapped after the traps silently rearm. The goal with this system is to massively reduce the ability for bear traps to enforce a camping playstyle. Instead, a far more effective strategy would involve using the bear traps to cut off loops and catch survivors that make use of high traffic areas. This would put a focus on more interesting gameplay that has a better back and forth between players. Finally, dear viewer, it's time to talk add-ons. For the most part, this killer's add-ons are definitively okay. However, I would argue that there is room for improvement. Some add-ons have weak effects, others have repeating effects, some are unhealthy, and finally, some have had their effects made base kit under this concept. Overall, I think that an add-on pass could really help to make this killer's power more effective and interesting to play around with. Further, there is another aspect to the Trapper's add-ons that I think could be interesting to play around with. Currently, all of his add-ons are mechanical in nature. They come in the form of tools or modifications that directly affect a bear trap. Whilst this isn't necessarily a problem, it leaves little room to explore the character's lore. Personally, dear viewer, I think it could be interesting if there was a mix of both mechanical and sentimental add-ons. With that in mind, this concept has changed some add-ons, as well as their effects, in order to explore the lore of this character some more. Oh Cameron, I hear you cry, you've really outdone yourself with this one. Reworking both the add-ons and their effects proves that you're either really lonely, or have way too much free time on your hands. Which is it? Well, dear viewer, you've already trapped me with that question. The first brown add-on is the Torn Sketch. This add-on gives the trapper a notification if a survivor is within 24 meters when a trap is set. This add-on would allow for a trapper to identify if survivors are lurking nearby and waiting to disarm recently placed traps. The trapper gloves have been reworked to drastically increase the trapper's reload speed when acquiring bear traps from a locker. This would act as a simple quality of life add-on. The heavy duty jaws are a new wave meme add-on. The basic premise is that these traps are gathered in the same way as the current system, making the setup more difficult. However, these jaws are more powerful once placed. First, survivors would be unable to free themselves from these jaws, and instead require a teammate to free them. Second, players who disarm these traps will be both injured and suffer from deep wounds, limiting them to a single disarming action before needing to mend. Finally, these traps will be able to briefly stun a trapper if he steps into them. This will make using these traps more risky, but also more rewarding once placed. The last of the brown add-ons is the Improvised Leg Brace. This one grants a simple chase bonus to the trapper whenever he is carrying 0 traps. While empty on traps, he will have a slightly increased lunge range, which could make the difference in some niche circumstances. The first yellow add-on is the Wax Brick. This one increases the time required to disarm traps based on a token system. Basically, the more traps that have been disarmed, the longer it takes survivors to disarm other bear traps. Useful if a player plans to make their bear traps visible and easily disarmed. The Pyrite Chunk is a simple add-on. This one doubles the duration that Killer Instinct lasts for when applied through either disarming or escaping a bear trap. The fastening tools have been demoted to yellow and given a new effect. In addition to placing traps quicker, this add-on will allow for traps to be placed silently. This could potentially allow a trapper to place traps mid-chase if he manages to block line of sight. Next, the Coffee Grounds have been reworked to take advantage of the trapper's inability to trigger his own traps. With this add-on, stepping on bear traps will grant a short burst of speed and allow for a trapper to close the distance if a survivor fails to trigger a trap. Of course, using this add-on alongside the heavy duty jaws would be hilarious and pointless. The final yellow add-on is the 4-coil spring kit. This one simply increases the time required for a survivor to attempt to free themselves or to free a teammate. Starting the green add-ons is the Trapper Bag. This add-on hasn't been altered in any way. It's currently a very consistent and useful add-on that improves the Trapper's setup. The Cracked Miner's Helmet allows for bear traps to be automatically rearmed if the Trapper is stunned by any means. This could allow for a Trapper to rearm traps mid-chase without having to interact with the bear trap itself. The Lightweight Harness is a simple add-on that reduces the Trapper's terror radius anytime he isn't carrying any bear traps. This add-on could allow for some stealthy plays once he's set up his power. The Lengthened Jaws have been reworked, given that their old effect is base kit in this concept. This add-on now increases the time it takes for survivors to mend deep wounds that are received from bear traps. This could apply to survivors who are freed from a bear trap, or to survivors who disarm bear traps while injured. The Unstable Explosives are a new add-on that seeks to mimic Unnerving Presence somewhat. This add-on will trigger a difficult skill check similar to the perks Overcharge and Depression. With this add-on, however, the difficult skill checks occur when a trapper gets within range of a survivor disarming a bear trap. If the survivor fails the skill check, they won't disarm the bear trap, but will be injured or suffer deep wounds, and be marked by Killer Instinct. This add-on would make disarming bear traps near the trapper extremely risky. The Antique Jaws have had the effects of the Serrated Jaws and Rusted Jaws combined. This add-on applies both Mangled and Hemorrhage to anyone that steps in a bear trap. This add-on would apply considerable slowdown and incentivize the use of healing perks and items. The Miner's Tool Belt improves the trapper's action speed anytime he's carrying 0 traps. This add-on would allow for the trapper to make use of certain mine games at pallets and windows without having to use perks. The Oily Coil has been reworked to now reveal the auras of survivors who are marked by Killer Instinct. This would greatly improve the tracking potential applied by bear traps when a survivor is freed from one or disarms one. Given that the aura reading duration is tied to the Killer Instinct duration, this add-on would have some good synergy with the new Pyrite Chunk add-on. The Honing Stone hasn't been altered, given that it's already a powerful add-on. It still puts survivors into the dying state if they free themselves from a bear trap. The Iridescent Honing Stone has been reworked, given that this rework concept makes disarming traps far more punishing. The add-on now rearms bear traps after a survivor is hooked. This add-on could reduce the time a trapper has to spend managing his traps and potentially allow for free health states. Finally, the Grizzly Head Trophy grants some new chase value to bear traps. With this add-on, catching survivors in bear traps would grant tokens. These tokens would allow for bear traps to reveal auras based on a survivor's proximity. This would allow even disarmed bear traps to give value by enabling certain mind games. To summarise, the goal of this add-on pass is to buff and consolidate effects, whilst offering some new and interesting strategies to the trapper. Each tier of add-on now has the possibility of offering some chase value to the trapper once his bear traps are set up. Further, other add-ons offer improvements to aspects of this power's rework. The goal is to create a set of add-ons that are interesting to play with and offer a number of potential synergies. That's it for this one. These are all the suggestions I have for improving the trapper's current weaknesses as I see them. Let me know what you think, leave a comment or make a forum post and send a link. Whatever your ideas are, I want to hear them. I don't make this video to declare my ideas as gospel or something, I just hope to maybe inspire some conversations. By discussing our ideas and putting them together, we can get that bit closer to making DBD the best version of itself. Thank you very much for watching, dear viewer, and I hope to see you in the next one.